we found our scene. And while the morning light is here, let's make it happen. Hey everyone, Judd here. Welcome to my real-time demo. This is one of the pieces I did in London recently. And I just wanted to share this short piece. Kind of captured it halfway, a little ways into it, not quite half. But also to share that I've got 3 other real-time demos that I'm doing narration like I'm doing now on Gumroad as one digital download. So you can buy the whole thing and watch about 3 hours. Each demo is about an hour with different locations around London. So if you are interested, it's in the description below, and I'll have the link at the end if you want to check that out. There's a church location, kind of a cottagey location, and then the Tower of London, kind of castle. So some classic London landmarks if you're interested in that. But for now, let's look at this scene. This is right behind Downing Street, and it is in the morning, so it's catching the sun on the backside. So you caught me halfway through the block in here. So we're really focusing on the light, the morning light hitting this architecture. And so the key here is these big, simple, bright shapes against the silhouettes of the trees and playing with the shadows. Now what I did on the toned paper, and my materials are linked down below. If this is the first time you're with me, I like to paint on toned paper, and I'm using gouache, is really building up some chroma. So you can see that warm, peachy, orange underlayer. That's my first layer of paint before I start coming in with these bright highlights, right? So gouache is all about layering, or at least the way I paint gouache is about layering. And so we're kind of working up to this bright highlight, which is just glowing off these buildings. But you can't just paint white, right? The glow comes from these different tones underneath and then working up to light on top. So within this shape of the building, I'm actually going a subtle cool warm, which is sort of a pinky, up to yellow right on that seam. And then I'll come in with the really pale, bright yellow, white-ish highlight for the final layer of these buildings. So that's kind of the gist here. You caught midway through the block in, which is just trying to find 5 to 7, 10 maybe basic shapes. On the shadow side of the building, you can see the shadow going from cool at the top down to more of a warm, because you're getting all the bounce light from the road up into the building, whereas the top of the building sees more canopy light exposed to it. That's why it's cooler. And so, just trying to knock in the values quickly, and then get into color adjustments and those kinds of things to tackle it simply. Now, with this little, quick scene, which is probably an hour painting, it's really about the obscuring the building behind with the trees in front. And so what we're trying to do is overlap. So that tree coming over that main seam of the building is important because it pushes it behind and creates some depth. The darker tree on the left side pushes the lighter tree, because the darker tree is actually on my side of the road. The lighter tree is on the far side of the road. So we're trying to create planes of distance even though we're just looking across the street. Right. So right now, just blocking in the trees as shapes. They're catching a lot of sunlight, and so they're quite bright and warm. And the sunlight will really be sold by the shadow side of the tree. Strong shadows in the belly and undersides of trees are a good way to clue in a viewer to the sun. Right. So the building is one thing that communicates the light, but the shadows of everything else in the scene, like long shadows cast by people or whatever, are another small ingredient to get the light to sell the idea of bright sunlight. So that's what we're doing here. That seafoamy kind of shape in the middle is the cast tree shadow on the building, which picks up some of its green because it's bouncing in and out, but it's a lot lighter and greener than the other shadow on the other side. So there's a lot of subtlety in this. It's not really about the architecture at this scale, but we do want to allude to it at the tops of the building, whatever those statues and details, architectural details are, will be the focus. This is a 3/4 inch wash brush. It's from Princeton. It's an Aqua Elite, and now I can't find it. And it's got a clear handle, so that's how you can spot it. Yeah, you can see the clear handle here, so it's nice and big. And right now I'm just trying to kind of refine the shape here. So coming in with a little bit of that brighter tone on top. Really trying to maintain that sharp edge in this particular case, which is a nice contrast with all the roundy edges of the trees and those kinds of other marks. The trick to architecture, I think, is, especially in the sun, like this, to not push the shadows too much, too hard. If you go too dark with a lot of shadows here and there, it gets real contrasty real fast, and you kind of lose the light and shadow side of the building as a whole because you're leaning into all these bits and pieces that kind of break that shape apart. So it's a tricky balance between the overall value of light and shadow in that building. Think of it like a tissue box, right? And then all the little parts and pieces on top of it. So gouache needs a lot of layering, particularly if you're painting on a toned surface like I am. So this is the second sky layer. So notice some holes I'm leaving. I'm not painting over the whole thing. There's some purpley bits that I'll put in and exaggerate because it's not quite daytime. It's more of that early morning vibe. So not quite bright sunny noon, but a lot sunnier than I thought London would be, to be honest. I was preparing for a lot of rain, so it was kind of a nice surprise. When layering with gouache, you can use a fairly thick paint and a little bit of water. It's like barely enough just to get the paint to move, because it's going to melt down into the surface. And so when I'm agitating the layer right now with some of this purple, it's going to melt down and kind of uniform. It's going to dry uniformly, and the values, it'll read as one value. But up close, you'll see all these color variation, and that's the trick, more of that impressionistic approach on this guy. Not, you see a little clouds up in the upper right of the video, or the upper left of the video. I'm not adding much. I don't want to. I'm basically keeping the sky as dark as I can to keep the building as bright as possible. That's the idea, right? So intentionally leaving out clouds in this case to focus on the silhouette of the building. Keep it nice and bright. So starting into architecture, looking for key landmarks. There's a couple of big windows here. I'm grabbing the piece so I can look at it. Couple of windows as landmarks. When thinking about architecture, my thinking is find a few anchor points like big windows, and then where do they sit Are they symmetrical? Like, do they fit in the center of this tower idea, right? How many are there? So they're centered, there's 3. This one's twice as big as this one. This one is in the center of where that tower hits that other roof line. So you're trying to find like sort of coordinating dimensions of the architecture so you can not get lost. Because if you just start on painting a window and then start adding other windows, you might paint it too big or too many and they're in the wrong place. And so starting with those key areas kind of helps build it out from a couple of landmarks. You don't want to overdo it. You can see above my hand just all the detail in these buildings. Columns and extrusions and insets and shadows, and then the windows are reflecting and just all kinds of stuff going on there. Like at this scale, can't paint all of it, so picking our battles on what we're going to paint. Now that dark is more in the focal area to kind of draw us down to the street level from the top. So very intentional there. And I'll be building up some of the tone on the right window with its reflections and such. So a little bit of perspective on some of those windows. Perspective is, that's all the windows are for, really, is to sell the perspective. So you want the street level to read with the windows height. They get smaller and closer together as they fade away. It just needs to be realistic enough to where it doesn't feel strange. So some key areas of this piece, these big underhangs, have cast shadows. So they are casting their own shadows on the building, which have a cooler quality, kind of like a lavender. And so it's a nice way to add some cool contrast within that area of warm highlight. So that's what I'm doing now. So now I'm kind of checking the windows, and I see that the count and the number. I'm like, oh, these windows start to the left of where the tower edge is, and trying to coordinate there. Just some bits and bobs on the edge of the shadow, sort of imply all these pattern. I don't know all the architecture terms for these, but those notches along the underside of some of these ledges. So some broken edges and lines like that are enough to hint at that without going into detail. Now you could take that whole tower, zoom it up, and paint it 9x12 and really get into all of the detail around this stuff. But that's a different painting. Right, so I'm using kind of like an orangey tone as a shadow, but it's really kind of like the underside of a lot of those bricks, and then some of the edge that's actually a different material. Like sometimes on the corners of buildings, like I don't know why, but there's like a different kind of stone that's got a different color. And so that's what I'm trying to indicate here. And often with architecture, I'll be adding lines in and shapes and then destroying them by painting back over them and breaking them apart so they're not quite so obvious. So it's just as much adding detail as it is destroying detail. And we'll see that as we get further along here. little railings or whatever those are at the top of the tower thing. And then we've got a little bit of the window sort of inset, and then this window on this side is much darker and cooler because it's dark in there and it's reflecting the sky, which has got a cooler tone. Now that building is also, I think that's a bench or something, or bike rack or something, I don't know. But it's also casting a shadow. So down that alley, because there's a split in the building between the buildings, there's a cast shadow down in there that I'll add to.
Oh, jeez.
Alright, so hinting at those arched windows, overhangs, the biggest ones. And then kind of disturbing some of those edges so they're not quite so heavy and obvious. But I did like these little triangle, I don't know what you call them. I'm sure someone familiar with architecture is just like pulling their hair out watching this, watching me struggle with these terms. But there's kind of these little roof pitches on the tops of each of those tower nuggets. So I'm adding some warmth in there too, because they're still getting some cast warmth from the street level up into those. Just blend that window right into the tree. It's kind of a nice unifying shape on that side. It doesn't float there. Unlike this window, which is sort of intentionally floating there because it's more of a focal area. This is some green reflections on that glass that are reflecting the tree, right? So it's actually not quite as dark as you think it is because it's catching a lot of light and reflecting it based on the angle. Same up here. Seeing the reflection of the sky bouncing off and only seeing, as the angle changes where I'm at looking, I'm seeing into the building versus the sky reflected off the window. Those little details can help sell the whole concept of the lighting. Like obviously the main facade of the building that's super warm and in sun does most of the heavy lifting, but all these other parts and pieces help support that idea. So I'm using a little bit of orange here, kind of like a yellowy orange, to add some chroma right on the edge as the light transitions into shadow for some extra pop. It gives it some glow and the feeling that it's really intense bright sunlight. That helps. Kind of the inner window, when the windows are inset like that inner wall will often be cooler, and it's getting bounce light in. So when I'm using those horizontal strokes, what I'm doing is I'm trying to imply brickwork and stones. Like it'll merge down to be almost invisible, but you'll hopefully you detect a little bit of variation that imply bricks without me taking a liner brush, like drawing bricks, which never looks as good. So the more we can be efficient and get to an approximate detail, the better. Now this is like the ultra highlight, right? And what I'm doing is kind of overpainting a lot of those shadows I put in, just to squeeze them. And I'm also not covering everything underneath. So when I put in those marks like that, there's actually a subtle shadow between the mark I just made and what was already there. And so it gives it a little bit more definition without drawing the shapes. It's just sort of using what's there and then adding another layer without covering up everything underneath. Because if you lose all that saturation too, it's not going to look as good. You lose the warmth, right? Whenever you add a ton of white to something, it's going to cool it off, desaturate it, kind of just kills the whole chroma. So that's why that underlayer is really important. When you have a lot of warmth in there, then it kind of reads and jives with that light on top and gets it to kind of feel more like a warm, sunny highlight. Kind of a gleam versus a yellow building, for example. So redefining some of this architecture, yeah, ... So just that little staccato mark is enough to imply some architecture. Right, bigger bricks, quote bricks. Nice, big, clean. So now you get the sense of texture and brickwork, and now the values are really reading, right, which is starting to come together. Makes the shadow feel darker, right? We put light against dark, now the shadows feel darker. And then I'm dialing it down as I work to the left, a little pinky-er, a little more pink, cooler, so that I even have a transition between warm light on one side near the seam or the point corner of the building, and then a slightly cooler light as it moves off to the side. And I'm trying to use the brush marks themselves to reinforce the perspective lines. So kind of angling it up as it gets towards the top eave, right? Those strokes are angling in the line of perspective. It just helps to reinforce the invisible vanishing lines to that. So you're getting, they're doing kind of double and triple duty. 1, brick texture, 2, vanishing lines, and 3, like architectural details, all in one stroke if you do it right. Not that I always do it right, but that's the idea. So here's the cast shadow of the shadow side of the building into the alley, which if you squint is more or less the same value. I think I maybe darkened it up a little bit, but not much. You can see how gross my palette is. It's pretty common. I don't really clean it out that much. So again, these are like the lighter brick material on that shadow side, not overpainting the whole thing, but I sort of set it up in a way to where I could do the lighter bricks, and now the darker borders of the windows, etc., like I revealed themselves because I didn't paint everything else. I just forgot what I was saying. Sorry. Yeah. This is a trick that works really well, where it's like you go slightly darker on the shadow side and then you come in with a lighter value for some architectural detail. Don't cover up the whole thing, and then you can hint at some of that stuff. Some tree holes just to eat up that edge. Oh, palette. That's what I was saying. Yeah, the grunginess. The only thing I would really clean my palette out for is super bright highlights, like the face of that building, and then skies. Skies need to be pretty clean. Like if you get any green or like real dirty stuff in the sky, it's really going to stand out. And then on your super bright highlights. But other than that, a lot of the grunginess actually works pretty well. It keeps things neutral and more natural feeling versus kind of right out of the tube chromatic, because you're dialing down everything out of the tube more often than not anyway. So there's some built-in unity using the grunge stuff on your palette. Here I'm just picking out like distant little whatever things on the top, shadows, or not shadows, statues, and iron things, railings and antennae or whatever. I don't know. There's just junk all over the tops of these buildings. So enough to where it gets it to read without being distracting. So I think the light is definitely coming together. We've got some little things on the street, like I think these are like traffic things to keep people from driving down those streets. Got to be real careful. I'm trying not to make them too even. They need to have some interest. I'll probably destroy them too, some of them, so they're not quite so stark feeling. They're a little big too. But the stuff I'll add down here, like the bus station terminal and some people, and there's a classic phone booth, and some of that is really just for scale. And to add a little life to the city, right? It's like an early morning, so it's like people going to work and whatever. So that's part of it. It's not just like you don't add anything, then it's like oh, is this the post-apocalypse? Like, where is everyone? We're just not used to seeing cities like that. So when you don't have any people, it's weird, or it can be weird unless you're doing it very intentionally. So they're actors in the story. So if we're thinking about what helps sell a bright sunny morning in a city, which talking about the light and architecture and shadows and all those kinds of things. Yep. But also the people are a part of it. I think I actually removed most of that one. It's a little too much. This stuff is like lampposts and streetlights, and are more add when you need them versus don't follow exactly what's there. So really the idea is like you can connect the foreground to the background. You can add scale. They overlap things, right? So like that one with the bus stop, it kind of overlays the tree, so then it pushes the tree back and adds depth. Like you're using them to do things versus just putting them in. It's like, oh, I count 8 of them. I'm going to put 8 in. So, traffic lights, I want a spot of red in, so I'm going to put a traffic signal in and throw some red in, right? It's more of the visual choice rather than being literal to what's in the scene. But strong verticals are always nice. So I'm just adding some sunlight parts of the trees. So on this side of the street, the sunlight is just catching the tip of that tree as it spills over the building into that other tree. So again, little ingredients that help sell the light story. Trees are just, one of those things where everyone's going to paint them a little differently. That's kind of what makes them great. And everyone has to find their own way of simplifying, because you can't paint a million leaves, or maybe you shouldn't. And so how are you going to do it will be different no matter who it is. So I try to keep them as big shapes for quite a bit of time, and then try to come in and break up the shapes, but not too much. Now, sunlit trees like this, like early morning, can be tricky because you're seeing some leaves facing you will look white because they're waxy and they're reflecting the light right into your eye. So maybe you pick out some of those, maybe you don't. So you need to know, like here, that's what I'm doing. It's like I'm hinting at, okay, these are real specular reflections in that tree, but I'm not going crazy because I don't want to distract from the building. So it's a balance. And it's really about edges. Like trees for me are about edges. It's both the exterior edge of the tree, which kind of describes its character, like its how its branches and leaves interact, like with the sky or whatever is behind it, and then the inner edges, which is like how does it transition between the light side and the shadow side and into the belly of the tree. So it's really about like how you break up those edges is what you're really doing on with leaves, and how many you include or how many you don't, and the branches you include or the branches you don't. So here I'm just hinting at kind of the structure of the tree. Like, don't paint the whole branch, even if you see it. Let it weave in and out, just like it would sort of more naturally. If you do it too well, unless you're looking up into the tree, that's a use case where it can be, which I guess is a little bit like this. But the point is, if you cover the whole thing, all the great value transitions of the leaves, it sort of like looks like it's pasted on when it's really only, weaving through that. So just something to think about. You need a lot less than you think on branches and tree trunks and stuff. So adding a little bit more warmth and dark to the foreground tree to separate it from the background. It's really about that edge. It's definitely reading. That core central shadow cast by the tree is like my favorite part of this. I think it came out really well. You can even see in the final painting, like some of my original drawing, like the orange pencil actually shows through, which is fine, right? It's just more architectural detail that's got a warm tone, which works, I think. I think we might be starting people. Are we starting people? Yes. So what I was doing was like watching people for a second, because like now it's time to add them. So I might try to like glimpse at. There's a couple. There's a guy on a bike. That person's got a backpack. That person has a hat. Blue, red, black. White pants, dark pants. Like, I'm looking and trying to get some input from what's there to throw it in. And so like on the left side or the right side here, right? Like some light figures, because they're catching the light that's going into the alley. So they stand out against the shadow side of the building, which looks really nice, right? That's the only reason I added them there. The other side is the reverse. Put a slightly darker figure in front of the shadow. It's popping out, making it feel a little bit brighter. Trying to angle them in motion so it feels like it's lively. They're not just like standing in T-pose or whatever. I guess they could be waiting for the bus, but Figures usually look better when they're in motion, or at least their hips are in such a way where they're like leaning on one side or the other. There's some asymmetry to a figure in some form. It's always more interesting. But figures are hard, I get it in context, but less is more. Shoulders, hips are the key. Highlight the top of the head, top of the shoulders. You can get away with a lot. Connect them if you can. Don't space them out, right? Have one, maybe two that stand out and you can really read, and then the rest are kind of connected blobs of figures. Work well. Eating up some of that shadow, hinting at, hey, this is cast by leaves, so that edge is going to be broken. Be careful where you add too much small details, right? You think of it like a really strong spice. You don't want to it's like salt. Like, you don't want to over flavor the whole thing. You just need a little bit where it's needed. So I think I fudge out some of these. What am I doing on the road here? Road, I think. Sidewalk? Sidewalk. Yeah, so I carved back on these posts and things like that. They were too big. Yeah. So see, I kind of eat that up on the sidewalk. I feel better then. Yeah, much better. Just the nice thing about gouache, right? Like, you can come back and clean up an area, reform it, because it dries so fast that there's always the chance to make some edits. Now the road, this is a little bit of a tricky scene. I might do it slightly differently next time if I were to scale this up. For example, like, the shadow is basically right at the road, like right where the road meets the sidewalk. So it could be read as, well, that the road's just dark. It's like, yeah, but technically in this case, it's the road also in shadow that just so happens to be right up to the sidewalk edge. It's just sort of a weird coincidence based on the height of the building and the time of the day. So it's a little strange. Like, I might actually put a beam of light going from the left corner up into that alley, as if like there was also a alley on this side of the street. So what I'm doing here is I'm adding a little bit of transition to say, oh, well, the road actually goes out a little ways before the shadow starts. It doesn't really matter that much. I think it still works either way, but it was a little bit of a tricky, like, how do I deal with this? The other option, I could just make more of the road in sunlight and have the shadow more in the corner, but I think it works. I think it's fine. Mostly because I like the area of rest of the shadow. Just that line of people and pipes and whatever is like really busy, and so just having like a calmer bottom of the piece, I think, works a little better. So just trying to figure out this like transition, kind of cleaning up the perspective a little bit. Softening the edge. There's a lot of hard edges above, so this one can be kind of soft. And then within the road, shadow, I'll be able to play with some more tones. Like, I think I go a little cooler and brighter with some blue, as if the road's a little wet and it's reflecting the bright blue sky. Yeah, right in here. So as long as the value stays the same, roughly, you can play around a lot in that shape. And darkening up that shadow just a little bit. I think here's where I go a little brighter in that shadow. Maybe. Maybe. Not enough. There. So I actually mixed in some of the sky because it's literally reflecting the sky. So both it makes sense physically, as in physics, but also to unify the painting too. Kind of lightens it up. Makes it feel airy, the shadow, which is always good. Never want our shadows to feel too dead. But, I mean, I could throw pink in that shadow. Yeah, do whatever. It's like, it doesn't really matter. As long as when you squint, it sort of resolves as shadow. Like, I could throw green. Like, hey, the tree's actually throwing some light and reflected light down in there. Like, all that could work. And you could get away with it. So, shadows are a great way to, experiment and vary color as long as you maintain the value. This is just road lines, traffic lines, which, again, they're really just to reinforce the perspective. Like, you don't have to put them in, but they can be useful in that way. Just don't mess them up like I did there. Kind of in the final stretch here. A couple little more details, and then I think we're going to call it good. So again, if you like these videos, I've got 3 more. Check out the link in the description below, and we'll see you next time.